So, Larissa, we just have the two comments. The first is from Judith A. Gibbs. Again, these are comments submitted on the city website specific to the charter. Judith says, I am 100% in favor of having the municipal budget go to the voters of Sanford to be voted upon at the June election. Since the school budget must be on the June ballot, the addition of the municipal budget should not cause any overwhelming issues. The voters of Sanford who want to have the ability to vote for or against this budget should have this opportunity. I was part of the last charter commission, and the inclusion of having the budget being removed from the June ballot based on voter turnout was a compromise between those of us who wanted the budget to be put forth to the voters of Sanford and those who did not. I think it is time for the budget to be more transparent. Those voters who are interested will vote if given the opportunity. Thanks, Judy Gibbs. The next comment comes from Steve Cabana. His comment is, please reinstate the rule for the municipal budget to have to be Please reinstitute the rule for the municipal budget to have to be voted on each year. It will add nothing in terms of cost to the process since we hold an election every June for the school budget. It was a poorly written clause in the existing charter that essentially removed the public from having any say in the approved budget. It is our right, even if only 5 people show up to vote, to be able to decide what our fate is for property taxes. Those are the only 2 comments submitted. Do we have any other members of the public here to speak? Okay, seeing none. Are there any on Zoom? I see Maura is on Zoom. No members on Zoom here to speak? All right, we'll close that. So, what has it been, 3 weeks since we last met? So I've forgotten everything that we've talked about. What I was going to do, but Steve, you may usurp this, what I was going to do is start at the beginning of Article 6 again, refer to the highlighted items on our agenda that Larissa gave us, and just highlight some of the key things that we had talked about, or maybe not decisions that we had made, but sort of consensus that we had sort of come to, just as kind of a starting point. The budget committee the current budget committee was invited to this meeting as well, right? All right, so I don't believe that there are any that are here other than the council members. So wanted them to be able to have input as well. So Steve, how do you want to do? So I was going to go about it that way, but if you want to start with you said you had recommendations ready on Article 6 already.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to my original recommendation, which was to keep the budget committee timeline and process in place, but have the budget committee just change the membership of the budget committee to the 7 elected city councilors and the 5 elected Board of Education members, and basically keep everything else intact. I've heard from the last few meetings that we've had is, the public representation. I would eagerly invite to have 4 to 5 public members be part of that budget committee. But if you go back and look at last Tuesday's budget workshop with the council, having been once before the council in February, 4 meetings in March with the budget committee process, another meeting which included a public hearing, another meeting at the city council with a presentation on the budget, further debate, and then having to follow that up with yet another city council budget workshop, right? That still hasn't gotten there, and the rehash and going over the same information multiple times is not productive. So I would like to start being more productive, starting with the elected officials in that process from the word go, and have the definitive decisions being made. I'm not observing that the delegated authority, well, the delegation to the budget committee, as it currently is, with 4 members of the public and three elected officials, that delegation of going through that process and then them making a recommendation to the council is not producing a definitive result.
And I'd say that comes from sort of the lack of, Councilor Stackpole referred to the budget committee as a paper tiger, for instance. There is no authority with the budget committee. Budget committee doesn't understand their role and where the decision-making ultimately lies with the council anyway. correct? And so if I'm gathering your point, it's that you want, if the city council, if the entire council is the one that's ultimately making a decision, you'd like them to be fully engaged earlier in the process, so you're not having to repeat the same information multiple times.
Absolutely. And I think at the budget committee process, when you're talking about the very large municipal budget, and you're talking about the very large and complex school budget, it's those 12 elected officials that can have, a concerted conversation about the complexities in their budgets and how the two interrelate as far as our overall tax bill is concerned. I think that's very difficult to task anybody coming in from the public, even if they've done it. If they've done it several years in a row, I think you're okay. But absent that, they can't have reasonable input into the complexities of those two budgets. There's just too much there.
All right, so we had sort of come to a place where we were saying there was going to be, we were going to propose 2 members of the city council, 2 members of the school committee, 5 members of the public. You're saying, what you're coming to is all members of the school committee, all members of the council, and some number of the public to serve on this committee, 3, 4, 5, whatever the number is.
And have the members of the public have them for 3-year terms, 3-year staggered terms, so that there's continuity there.
Do we have comments from anybody on the committee besides me on this? Go ahead.
Don't disagree with you at all. I think the staggered ideas and having the public involved at that level is important. I guess hopefully we have the consensus that the numbers of school board members and counselors would be on that evenly or closely as represented as they could be without a quorum. And I think that's the best idea right now put forth.
So it's 7 council members and 5 school committee members.
That's my recommendation.
Is your recommendation.
It was from dealing this for 10 years. I listened intently, and I was getting all of the compromise. I'm going right back to that recommendation after last Tuesday's budget workshop.
Full group,
Mr. Chair?
both.
Go ahead, Councilor Stackpole.
So just a couple of questions on what you're discussing in terms of the makeup. First of all, if we don't find 5 members of the public to, I know we haven't decided that number, but 5 members of the public to run, I'm assuming that they're going to have to run for this, not be appointed.
Our discussion was about being appointed.
So the school committee will then, school committee, old news. The city council will then appoint 5 members.
That was what we had talked about last meeting.
Okay, all right. Okay, so my question was going to be around what happens if we can't find 5 members, but we'll find 5 members of the public to do that. I've forgotten my second question, so go ahead on.
Go ahead, John.
It's taken me a while to get to this point, but I agree with Steve's comment. Whether it's the full city council and full school committee is something you guys will decide. But I'd make it a quorum of both, therefore it's a public meeting and public can attend if they are so interested.
For me, there's no issue with having the 7 and the 5. We're posting those meetings as public meetings anyways. We'll post no differently in the future. If they're so assembled, they would have the ability to vote certain elements if they so chose. But keep that same process. Go through the public hearing process. Keep all those processes in place, and only at the end of that 4 to 5 week period do you then bring it with a. Well, it wouldn't even be a recommendation at that point. It would be for a council vote the first meeting in April, right?
Yep.
There would be no need for a recommendation because the product would have been developed over that 5-week period.
Kim?
So Steve,
Just
we've disagreed on this. We'll continue to disagree, but other than really adding the school committee membership in, how is that different than not having a budget committee and just bringing this to the city council? I mean, you're still going to have to present it twice. To me, again, I'm old-fashioned. I realize that. I got a lot of gray hair, but this looks like a lot like the old warrant committee, and it really bothers me, particularly given the political climate that we're going to experience over the next 10 years, locally and probably within the state. Really, really concerns me, but I'm not going down that road again. But explain to me how this is really all that much different than just my proposal of just bringing it to the council. You present it once to the council, maybe over a couple of days, and we vote on it.
Sorry, Bob, what's the part that really concerns you? You said you were really concerned.
Yeah. Well, what really concerns me is going back to again, I'm just going to say it again. Yeah, I'm old-fashioned. I experienced this. I mean, I'm the only one in the room here, and I'm not in the room, but maybe Jack remembers some of this stuff because he's been around and an observer of politics in the community for a long time. But we used to have discussions about how many miles of paint we could paint down Route 109 with a number of gallons of paint that are in storage. And we had such ridiculous budget scrutiny. And again, I'm getting to the potential for my concern for the political climate. I'm just waiting for some of the national political agendas, both sides now. I'm not picking on one or the other, to basically invade the school committee or to invade the city council. Again, I've said right now we are truly fortunate in the past 10 years, at least using the system that we have, that we haven't had these huge budget debates that border on the ridiculous, or did border on the ridiculous, and I'm just concerned we're going back down that same road.
I just want to interrupt you real quick, because you might be hearing something that I'm not hearing, so I might need education here. All I heard City Manager Buck say was that the budget committee would still exist, that it would be comprised of 7 city council members, 5 school committee members, potentially 3 to 5 members of the public. Otherwise, the process is exactly the same as it is today. What is the this that you're concerned about related to that statement? Because it doesn't feel that different than what we're already doing right now, other than having the school committee as part of the budget committee.
I'm concerned that the budget process will become too politicized and not efficient. Remember, I'm still going back to the last charter, and our mission for the last charter was to improve efficiency. I see this as a step backwards. It's not improving efficiency, so that's my concern.
And it's specific because of the addition of the school committee members.
Not particularly, no. I said before, I didn't have, in fact, I think I said before that I welcomed the addition of school committee members, and that was before we started this review process. So, it's not that I want to exclude the school committee. Just in terms of an efficient process, you present it once over a couple of days to the city council. Those are public meetings. We can set those up as far as the public being involved any way we want to. Of course, the public will have an opportunity for input, so on and so forth. It just streamline the whole process. Everybody presents once. The council gets educated, which I think is the point that the city manager is trying to make. It was sort of apparent when we went through last Tuesday's budget meeting that maybe not all of the city councilors were up to speed on the budget, and they had to vote on it. So how do we improve that? How, making the city council just accountable isn't doing it right now. So, I mean, my concern is for the city council too. We need to have a process by which the city council is more engaged. And I don't know how long I'm going to be on the city council, so I'm really speaking for future city councilors. They need to be more engaged, and that was very apparent last Tuesday night, as the city manager said.
But I completely disagree, because I think what I hear you saying is you're saying two different things. You're saying, well, what I think I heard you saying is that what you'd like is for the budget to just be presented once to one group of people in the city council, and you want to create efficiency there. On the other hand, you're saying the city council, who has had every opportunity through this entire process to be educated on this,
Yes.
was not ready to vote. So how do you marry those two things? How is that the fault of the budget process that the city councilors were not prepared to vote?
Well, it goes back to originally what I said with responsibility, with accountability. We're still going to be in a position where any city councilor can say, okay, I didn't do it, another subcommittee did it. And until the buck can be passed literally on that line, that the city council is responsible, I don't think you have accountability for the budget. I really don't.
But Bob,
It's the one thing we don't have accountability for.
You stated last meeting or 2 meetings ago that ultimately the whole paper tiger conversation, ultimately you know, and all the city councilors know, that whatever the budget committee does really has no say, really has no authority, really has no weight to it whatsoever. It's simply a recommendation to the council. You don't have to take that recommendation.
It's true. It's true. And understand here, I know I'm going to have to compromise on this, okay? So I'm trying to find my middle ground for compromising. And what's being proposed, I think, is too large, too big, too inclusive, if you want to use that word. And I think we need to streamline the process. I realize that's not going to happen. Okay, I mean, I don't believe that's going to happen. So my position is I've got to find some in between where I can compromise. Ultimately, I'm going to support whatever and I've said this before, whatever the budget committee, the charter commission recommends. Okay, so I think I've said before, I'm not going to come to the city council and try to torpedo any of the work that the charter commission is doing here.
Okay.
I just see things moving in the wrong direction.
Thank you. I needed to understand where you were coming from, where the objection was. I think I understand a little bit better right now.
Okay.
Any other? Kim, go ahead. Thanks, Kim. Jack.
If all 7 councilors are involved in the formulation of the budget, then they should be educated on what's going on. So, and it's the same with the school board. So I don't see a problem with this.
If they don't get educated, then it's time for different counselors. I think that is
That's
your
my
sole
point.
That is your major responsibility. And with this process, you'd shorten that effort, I guess, in the repeat of repeats.
Yep.
And put it all into a consensus group.
That's why I was confused, Bob, because I felt like the city manager's proposal was actually moving more towards what you had said you'd wanted before. So that's why I was a little confused. Other comments?
We're missing, I'm sorry, just briefly, Lance, we're missing the accountability factor in there. Okay?
Okay. Got it. City Manager. Buck.
So Councilor Stackpole, I mean, for me, the accountability is if you have 7 city councilors that are engaged in that process from start to finish, that's the accountability. As you recognized, we have some faction of councilors that are not to speed with the copious amounts of information that's been posted out there for months and months and months because they haven't been part of the process. They haven't been part of either the Budget Committee. They've had one presentation is never enough. My other reasoning behind having the 7 and the 5 is the City Council is voting on the school department's budget. That, I mean, you know better than anybody, that is a large, complex budget. I'm uncomfortable that there's potentially three councilors that have been better educated on that budget than 4 other remaining councilors, yet they are the authority that are voting on that budget. And I'm not yet convinced that they have the comprehensive viewpoint of how the two interrelate to each other. That's my concern.
Right, because they don't need to be. And that's my point. They don't need to be. Steve, I think in some ways you're making a good argument for my side, which is to eliminate the Budget Committee and just put it all on the City Council. But I've talked enough this morning. We've got a lot to do. So,
Well, I think it depends how you define Budget Committee, Bob. You know, we talked about a Budget Committee that was going to meet all year round. And
Yep.
I don't know how we determine that kind of authority if it's really just, city council and school committee members. I don't know what kind of parameters that we can put on here. But yeah, in looking at the way just the process as it is right now, I could see that. Part of what I like about the council and the school committee being part of the Budget Committee, particularly in televised meetings, is I would actually love to see the back and forth during the meeting of, why this side needs this and that side needs that and why this should be a priority versus this. Some of those give and take discussions that we don't really ever get to from the interested parties, because the school comes with their budget, city comes with their budget, then it gets debated by people who are sort of tangentially involved, but to be able to be debated and discussed with each other, I think would be valuable to the public.
Absolutely.
To me, this gets to, though, now we can revisit the reality of getting 5 citizens on this committee. I think is pretty low, given the turnout that I could be wrong, but given how you almost have to beg people to get on Budget Committee now for a 3-month commitment. Now you're talking about trying to get 5 people to serve 3-year terms. Should we have a discussion about? And to me, it's kind of 2 things. The taxpayer still needs to be represented. Should that representation happen as a part of the Budget Committee? Or now we're going to have to go into the whole, should the municipal budget be still put back out to vote? So do we as citizens want our representation to be on the committee, or do we want the ability to be able to vote on that budget at the end? If I was speaking, if I'm a member of the public, not part of this whole process, if I had the ability to be able to speak at public hearing, if I ever wanted to during the public participation or public hearing, or I could submit comments or whatever after having watched the meetings, and I had the ability to vote at the end, I'm not sure that I would even need to have a citizen be part of this year-long Budget Committee I don't know that the citizen part of the Budget Committee is really even necessary to have in there. So I know that's going against kind of what we talked about last time, but I wanted to throw it out there for discussion at least. How important is that to us, and how do you weigh that against, I know the councilors are not in favor of putting the municipal budget back to vote, and I think I understand the reasons why, but we need to have that discussion too. And it's the number one, we've only had a total of less than 10 comments from the public in the entire process here, but the only comments we're getting are that. I think that's the only ones. Go ahead, Paul.
And if the desire from the folks who have submitted comments, they're prime candidates for those 5 positions or 3 positions on that budget board. I see so much work that goes into prepping a budget and comparing it to my own home budget and saying, it's not a decision of whether we buy a car this year or not. And my wife and I making a decision that says, all right, we got to hold back on this. There's no vote other than the two of us. But when you get the involvement and the detail that Bob's, I go back to the warrant committee days, Bob, in my first 2 gigs with the town government. And the warrant
Yep.
committee was a miserable thing that made life a little difficult. But we've come that far to have a council and a school board. You put them both onto this budget committee. You do get the dialogue, fantastic. I do think it's critical that the public be educated as well. The problem I would have with having a vote by the public, if you're telling me that city council members can't understand the budget or take the time to swallow all that there is in a how many inch thick document, the general public is only looking at one thing. Is it going to affect my tax bill tomorrow? And if you turn it down, I think it can turn the school and the municipal side into a mayhem. And I don't think that's good practice either. So I think having the 2 accountable groups right there, full groups represented, and having some public input, get these folks that are interested in it, recruit them. That's it. Put your money where your mouth is, I guess, is the key. That's a little harsh, sorry.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so I continue to beat this drum about accountability, right? If you have, I think you can get 5 people for 3-year terms for the Budget Committee. The majority, the lack of interest has come in the past to me from Budget Committee members, from the public, that it was a meaningless process. Therefore, why do I want to do this again? So if you have a meaningful process, the public will participate in that. And again, it's about the institutional knowledge. So you have counselors and school board members, they're 3-year terms, and there's no limitation on that. So you build institutional knowledge and memory there, and it carries through, so you can have the complex discussions about sustainability year over year over year. That gets interrupted when you're starting over from scratch every time. So I would like the members of the public to have that same opportunity for building their institutional knowledge and bringing that forward. I don't struggle with the public voting on the budget. So the city made a decision 10 years ago to become a representative republic. That's the charter. That's the charter that you have now, right? You don't vote on the federal budget. Why did the people not vote on the federal budget? It's a representative republic. It's too large and too complex. It would be an emotionally based vote. You don't vote on the state budget for all the same reasons. The municipal is no different, and I will sit here and wag my finger as I am now, I apologize. Sanford is still reeling from the effects from its past, not letting go of that and not governing themselves in an efficient and appropriate manner. The streets and all of that in the capital program that I still struggle with to this day. It's at 4.25%, it needs to be 7.5% all day long. I still struggle with that. You're reeling from those past effects of emotional votes on a complex budget that didn't produce the results. And now our dollars are, year over year, 35% increase in doing the municipal roads. Gosh, if you just had done those roads in the past, right? We'd be at a point of maintenance. But that was not done because of that antiquated process that you were in. So as a manager, I recognize that. I live that every day. Oh, my taxes are too high. Well, your taxes were too low in the past, and they weren't used well. So now they're higher in the future because of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Jack?
if they do this referendum to get the vote back, can they write it, so that it's less than 25% of the last gubernatorial election, and they can cut out the 5-year sunset clause?
They could.
I mean,
They could come forward with that with a petition.
can that be written in the charter, that if they do that, you can put stipulations on what they can ask for? Or?
Well, actually, you could. because I came here from a charter that says that you as a citizen can't do that. You can't petition anything to do with the budget. You could petition anything but. So I've seen the extreme in the other avenue.
It just, I mean, for 5 years, we didn't have anywhere near 25% of the voters show up. I mean, last year I worked the polls, and then the school budget was the only thing on there, and it was really discouraging, the amount of people that came out to vote.
And so for this June, we'll have, council seat up there as well as the school budget, and I don't know. What do you think, Sue? How many voters do you think we'll get in June?
Primary.
Under 1,000?
Not sure if there are any races for the primary.
850,000?
Oh, I don't know. If
Less?
we have races for the state primary ballots, we'll probably get maybe between 5 and 10% turnout.
So,
I don't know if that's who you want making your decision makers.
Well, it's just, people want to vote, but nobody shows up to vote. I mean, we went down to Falmouth, Massachusetts for Easter, and they still have town meeting down there, and the people we stayed with, he's a town meeting member. They have 9 precincts, and I said, do you have enough people to run for those? And he said, in the liberal part of the town, yes. And if some of the other precincts don't have enough people to run, there's still plenty of people in town that will volunteer to do that. And he said there were like 220 town meeting members, and they go through the budget line item by line item. And it's like, and, I remember the days, vote for no more than 10, and there were 3 names on the list. And it was, people just don't seem to care about the budget. And then they'll say that the council's going to do whatever the heck they want, or not everybody, but they don't seem to be involved with what's going on.
so go ahead, John.
It's really evolution, right? The last charter commission that Bob and I sat on, and I think Maura's listening, 18 months talking about this stuff. Some pretty significant changes took place. The piece that we didn't want to struggle with, because we thought we'd get voted down, was what we're talking about, the budget. We wanted to eliminate the finance committee altogether, and we're talking about it again today. I think the time has come to eliminate it. I think I'm thrilled to see, like Matt and I here, being included in school, and it is complex. We've not really been involved in, the school budget hasn't been involved, so it is. Changing from city councilors voting their favorite friend as chair of the council. We eliminated that by creating an elected form of mayor. Huge change in the community. The thing that almost sunk the ship was going from a town to a city. That was the most emotional piece of the vote. So I think the conversation that Steve brought up first, and you've all been struggling with it, is what's the budget committee? Maybe there just isn't one.
Well, could I say to that, so if you eliminate the budget committee, right, there still has to be a review process, because the city council has to ultimately do that vote. And we're not talking about changing that power structure, because that would be a revision instead of amendment. So that's why I support keep the budget committee process and that timeline and time frame, just reconstruct the membership of that committee, because you're still going to have to do that process, and you've got a well-laid-out formal process already in our city charter.
And you wouldn't have to re-present to city council after the budget committee process, because the entire city council's part of the committee already.
Right.
That's part that would eliminate for you. Going back to the vote thing, though, I'll make counter arguments. Right now you have a population that I think feels unrepresented. And I look at it sort of like the 3-legged stool. The school department wants what the school department wants. The municipality wants what the municipality wants. The taxpayers want what the taxpayers want. And just as we're talking about this, if we don't have a vote, I don't know where the taxpayer gets. I mean, we have public hearing, but you guys don't even have to respond to public hearing. I'll make a comment at public hearing, or Jack, anybody can make a public comment, and you guys just kind of, and it's no offense against anybody, it's just the way the process is. There's no way to be heard necessarily in a way that's makes you feel represented as a citizen, and the only thing that the citizen has is the vote. So I'd feel okay about the whole process. I'd feel okay eliminating the budget committee completely if the citizens still had the ability to vote. And I'm not sure where the fear comes in, because if you still put in like the 20% number or the 25% number or whatever, we haven't met that in the past. It's on us as a community. I mean, if I feel disenfranchised and you give me the ability to be able to vote and I still don't vote and meet the 20% or whatever the requirement is, then that's on me. But to not
You
have,
already ran that cycle. You gave
Lan-
them that opportunity.
but I don't think anybody
Yeah.
knew. If you ask members of the community if they knew by not showing up that they were permanently giving up their right to vote on the municipal budget by not voting, by not having 20% show up for a 5-year period of time, if you say we're all uneducated anyway, you didn't say it exactly that way, but we're uneducated about the budget. We were certainly uneducated about, I didn't know that. And I don't think I was involved at the time, but I'm half involved. So anyway, somebody on the TV was talking.
Maura
Yeah,
has her hand
Lance,
up.
that was me, maybe. I know Maura's got her hand up. I just want to make a real quick point that I've made before. Having very low turnout. Now, this is not excluding the 20% clause, okay? If you just have very low turnout for both your school budget and your municipal budget, that's a very, very dangerous place to be.
They would fail.
Because they would fail, and it would be very easy for citizens who might not have the best interest of the city or the schools in mind to mount a negative vote. So I think saying that low turnout is okay, and that's not exactly what you're saying, but this is just kind of my warning about the whole conversation. If very low turnout is a very dangerous place to be.
I agree. I'm not
in terms
advocating
of somebody hijacking the process.
I'm not saying that that's okay. I'm advocating to still be able to vote on the municipal budget, but I'd still want to put that minimum, whether it's 20 or 25% number in there, so that event doesn't happen. Maura, I don't know if I can barely see the TV, so I'm sorry, Maura.
No, that's fine. So as you obviously know, I'm against voting on the budget because it's just an emotional vote. It is, in my opinion, going backwards when we should be going forwards. Sanford has always made choices to go to tie ourselves down. But I kind of resent it when there's a comment about there's nobody to represent the taxpayers. What the hell am I doing? I mean, I'm a taxpayer. You can talk to Steve. I probably give him the most grief on the budget this year. The taxpayers are represented. They elected us. I love the idea that we're going to have 12, like the school can attack the city side. We can talk about the school side. You're actually getting 5 extra elected officials discussing either side of, the city budget. You're getting 7 extra deciding and discussing the school side. But it really, really, really irritates me to say that the taxpayer is not represented, because that's what I do. So there you go.
Thanks, Maura. I probably shouldn't have said that. That was probably poorly spoken. All right. So I think everybody that's here seems to be in favor of the 7 and the 5 to Steve's proposal. Do I see anybody that isn't in favor of that? And do we want members of the public either 3 to 5 on top of that, which is kind of what we talked about last time? And you guys can take care of how to amend that in the notes or whatever. Do we want to come back to the vote discussion, or do we want to, move forward and go back? Do we need to make a decision on that right now?
I'd push that off.
Push that off. I
think there is consensus in the room about the 7 and 5 of the full board of each, and also having the general public there.
Okay. That's enough for us to probably move on at this point. I don't think I see any other hands up there. Okay. Did we need to, so, Steve, I think the next thing that we had, so now I don't need to go back through the rest of section 6, but where we had left off was on CIP. I think you were going to come up with, on the 4% number, and then there was a discussion of whether 50% of that should be for the rolling stock.
Yep. So the danger of, so currently they've ramped from,
610.3 is where we are.
yep, currently it had ramped from 2% up to 4% over a series of years. And what I saw at that point in time was the elected officials struggling with that ramp up, that forced ramp up. So they would, even though the number had to be there in the CIP, they would try to take it out of operational, right? So that slide backwards. So by putting it in the charter, I don't believe that it accomplished the full impact that it was intended to, because it was always a trade-off. CIP was building, so operations suffered, right? CIP built, so operations suffered. So I'm very hesitant to put that kind of a number into the budget beyond the 4% to force it to ramp up to 7 or 7.5.
Even though you think 7 or 7.5 is what's needed.
I can support that by numbers all day long, right? But I'm hesitant to put it in here. The 50% split on the roads, seen mixed results with that. I think the greatest impact that we had is you were on the budget committee at that time. Hey, we've got to fix the roads, right? So the concerted effort was put in there. They did the bonding. We've done the ramp up. So in this year's budget, we're putting, the budget still has $2.5 million in there. Next year it goes to 3, and next year we'll have the same debate of, wow, that really impacts the CIP. Where can we beat this out of all the rest of the budget, right?
Why are you hesitant to take the number to 7 or 7.5?
Because it's going to be a fiscal struggle, right? And as I have observed and worked with councils over the last 10 years, even though that's forced by charter and they can fall back upon that and say it's there for that reason, what do you do in the really bad year, right? You lose that flexibility. If we're going to come into a crash in the market here in the next 1 or 2 years, and you have to take some extraordinary actions, but the charter doesn't allow you to do that, I don't think it's wise to lock yourself in. I think you need to hold your officials accountable for the budgets that they're putting forward. And it's the same regard if the public was voting on it. Nobody wants to vote for an increased in taxation effort, but they want the roads fixed, right? But they want the roads fixed, and that's that dichotomy. Is I'm not going to vote to do it to myself, but I'll vote for people that will work with a budget that goes responsibly forward to fix the roads and things of that nature.
Mr. Chair, let me just say, yeah.
Hold on just a second. Go ahead.
Sure.
Well, I'll come back to you, Counselor.
Okay.
Again, getting back to comments prior, significant changes. As I look at the comparative analysis in the original book, it was, Steve mentioned, CIP was 2% with no specifications. We doubled it to 4% and put some towards rolling stock. What you're really saying is we need to double it again. So on that comment, I would say maybe change language not to exceed 7.5, if that's the number. I'd also go back to the 7 and 5 mixture. Anybody that's been on the council for a while or the school committee for a while, the current time commitment is, yeah, overwhelming at times, like today. So I would like to maybe ask you to modify that language to a quorum of each. You're not going to get 7 and 5 many nights. It's just not possible. We all have lives. So 7 and 5 is a nice goal, as is 7.5%. But I think that.
And Counselor, I will come back to you.
Yeah, take your time.
Quick comment on that, though. If 7 and 5 is what was there, would that eliminate any of the, I know you guys, you have your initial budget, and then you spend however many more meetings after that, sort of anticipating, who's going to be on the budget committee, what's it going to be, what are they going to want us to cut, what's the number really going to be, how many times do we have to cut this down? You cut it down 3, 4, 5 times before, and you're spending your own meeting time doing that. Would there be any of that eliminated by you all being members of one budget committee?
I doubt it. I think you're still going to meet, but I'll let the top cheese talk.
It would seem like, obviously, to get to the first run, you guys would do your own work, but all those pairing meetings, I was thinking.
It's challenging because we have to do a lot of prep work that I think would also be important for the 7 city councilors to also receive. So for us to get to that first point, we need some of that background. We get to that point, we bring the 7 city councilors on, and to be fair to them,
You got to go back.
we have to go back. So I worry that, I think in theory, it sounds like we'd be able to maybe do some of that, but I think that would be hard for us to pull off, and I think there would be I'd be concerned about that commitment. I'm sure there should be some efficiencies we could look at, but at the end of the day, I would be worried about putting that now onto all of the school committee members. As we go through the current process, you'll see during the budget committee, some of our school committee members will be part of that. They very much want to, but it comes to times that they
all
oftentimes
couldn't.
can't. So
Okay.
that's the challenge.
So it could be that everybody's on the committee, but only a quorum has to attend a certain meeting.
To keep that public meeting concept available.
Okay. Anybody have issues with that? I don't think so. So I think we can add that to the notes.
All I'm going to say is it would help a lot if city councilors went, attend. All you have to do to attend a budget committee member meeting of the school is just turn on your television and listen.
That's right. Yeah, there's nothing preventing people attending those meetings unless they're the workshops or whatever. But you can go too, though, right? Pretty sure I've been to one of your meetings. Yeah. Councilor Stackpole, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Regarding the budget composition, this isn't what I was going to talk about initially, but you brought it back up. I really don't think that we're fixing stuff that's not broken. We haven't analyzed what's broken. We haven't done this from a perspective of what's broken. We talk about the community vote. We're probably 50-50 on the community vote, and that's the only feedback that from what I can see about the budget committee that the public has given us. And so I'm not sure that what we're focusing on is what's broken. I think there are other things that are broken. And just remind me, what was the last topic we were talking about before we backed up to the composition of the budget, of the budget committee?
The CIP budget, Counselor, the 4% versus the 7%.
Okay, yeah, I got it now. So I have to say, and I hope that other former budget committee members will back me up on this, that the reason we have that language in there was to do, in fact, to protect the CIP. And in difficult budget years, it would be protected and wouldn't be the old ceiling tile replacement story that I said a few weeks ago. So that's my point. It's in there for a reason, and it's to protect the CIP. It's to protect the roads, not just now, but moving forward. And that's why, in addition to this, I proposed, although it hasn't gone anywhere, that we make this part of, we have some kind of a referendum vote to secure this. I mean, we're going to do this through this process, but that's what I was banging the drum for, to make sure that those numbers stayed in there going into the future. And we're not dropped, because we're putting all this money into the roads. I believe it's going to take us about 20 years to get everything all squared away. What's going to happen the next 20 years? The next council going to come along and say, well, we're not going to, old ceiling tile story. We're not going to fix the roads. We're going to do playgrounds, or we're going to buy a new police cruiser, or whatever. All legitimate. So there's a reason that language is in there. If it needs to be expanded, great. But I think it is there so that there is political cover and that there is management cover, that this is what I have to do. It's in the charter, and this is where the money has to go. And that's what that's where the community, I mean, this wasn't just the old charter review committee doing this. There was public outcry, worse than there was when we used to see the Facebook pages of potholes with a Titanic sinking in the pothole. Things were worse back then when we put this language in there. So something needs to be in there to protect CIP, to protect roads, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't think anybody's talking about eliminating the language, Bob. It was just, my question was around whether 4% was enough. For me, where that question came from was if the number is really 7 or 7.5. My biggest reason for proposing the bond for the roads 5 years ago or whatever it was to catch up, but it's also, it worked like this. It protected, we voted on that money being spent for the roads. Mm-hmm. That money could then no longer be spent for anything else. So, if we're talking about expanding operations or whatever it would have to be with that in mind, that money was already allocated. So, why I want to bring up the 7% is it's the same concept. Like, okay, so I understand that you want flexibility, but that kind of just gets us back to, okay, well, we would still have potential. It would be the first thing you might go to look to cut if something else had to happen. But if really 7% is needed, we're going to be getting behind. So I don't know what the right answer is, but to keep it at 4, we can do so if we want to maintain that flexibility. But do we want to consider upping the number to be more like in line with what's actually needed?
Okay, Mr. Chair, we're in agreement with what you just said.
Okay.
So on the 7.5%, if you look at that, so the CIP, the capital program is currently set now. You take the overall school and municipal budget combined, it's about $98 million. You back out the prior year's CIP, which is about 4, so that gets you down to $92 million. So if you look at 0.25% ramp per year, a slower ramp than what was in there, because it was at 0.5% before. You look at a 0.25% ramp per year, that's $230,000 to $250,000 per year additional going into your CIP. You get to the 7.5%, at that point in time, you're talking an $8 million capital improvement program, half of which, 50% is $4 million into road. What did we come up with a number of years ago? We need $4 million per year. So those numbers align well from all prior work that we've done. We know that the roads, I was looking at the 50% to the capital program for streets and roads, thinking that we're going to get to the point where you're not going to need that anymore, given today's pricing and such. No, you're going to need that. So I guess I would be comfortable if you're going to ramp to the 7.5% and you did that 1/4 point per year, and let that carry itself out until you get to that point. I think you'll be in a much better position than what you are currently.
The percentage is going to increase by the 1/4 point per year, but the number is going to actually increase by more than that because the budget is increasing every year.
So in this year's budget that I anticipate that ultimately will be approved by the council, we're at 4.5%.
Now, if we adopt that language, really what you're going to do is you've already laid it out for the next however many years that the council was going to. When we did the bonding, we didn't do the full bond that I wanted. You said, and your proposal was to come back and say, well, let's make it more part of the annual budget every year to have increases. If we put it here, you're really going to be doing nothing than you were already doing.
Correct.
You're just making it part of the charter.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. You've got me there. I'm with you.
So,
Hesitant.
so 1/4 point per year up to 7%. So this would be over a 12-year period of time?
I think that's very doable. I think you will see future approvals that will exceed that, but that's okay.
Well, it kind of is a compromise. You don't want to give up your flexibility, which I get, but we work our way to the number.
Because you're at 4.5 now. about 4.5% now, so, yeah.
Okay. Any issues with that kind of timeline? Anybody up on the screen? Maura, Bob? Does that sound good?
My only thought would be to align it with the charter and try to hit that threshold over 10 years instead of 12 years, but that's not really that significant.
Can we put the word minimum in there or something? That gives some flexibility, that if there is a good time, you can go more than 1/4%?
Or we could go with 1/3% for 9 years.
Yeah, there you go, okay.
Doesn't probably, no skin off your nose,
But-
probably.
The only question I'd have for
Oh, sorry, Joan.
Manager Buck would be, your fear was that you're losing some of that protection if the bubble bursts. Do you lose that if we jump to that 7.5 eventually?
I don't think so. So as I'm sitting here today, so we're at 4.5 now. So you're going to start with this 4 and work your way up. It's going to take you a couple of years just to get to where we are currently. And if 2 years from now, we take the fiscal nosedive for 2 to 5 years, yeah, no, I've talked myself out of it. I'm not worried about it at that point, because that's not going to be where you're going to have to make the hard cuts. That shouldn't be where you make the hard cuts.
Right. Joan, sorry.
Are you going up to 7 or 7.5%?
I was
I
thinking
think-
it
I
was,
think it should be
I was
the
thinking,
7.5.
sorry, go ahead. You were thinking what?
I was thinking that it should be the 7.5 because of the time frame. We're not going to be doing this again until 10 years from now.
How about
right?
7.33? Because then we could do 1/3% for 10 years. Sold? All right. Can we do that, Steve? 7.33, up to 7.33 over the next 10 years, and then 10 years from now, this is somebody else's problem?
Yeah. Whatever you want.
All right.
Whatever you want.
We'll
would
start
like
there.
to-
We're coming back, so
I would like to see the city get to the point, as I've been able to manage before, that when a piece of equipment, a rolling apparatus or such under that, its life expectancy is a 20-year piece of equipment. At the end of the 20 years, you just cut the check.
all right, so that gets us to the second
What that does for cash flow is incredible. What that does for investments is incredible. When I was managing Caribou during the years when we actually got interest on our money, we would offset a mill of taxation every year for the interest on the money that city held because of its capital program, right? So the taxpayers got that back, right? So they saved. I wrote a $450,000 check for a ladder truck, and they were offsetting about $1 million in taxation during the years of actually getting interest on your investments.
Interest rates are going up. That gets us to the second part of the same conversation, though. So you had issue, don't want to put words in your mouth, but with the 2% mandatory, with half of it being to the roads of the 4%.
Yeah, no, I have no issue with the 50%.
You have no issue with that, okay. I may have mischaracterized that. So 50%, you're
the-
also
the-
comfortable
the-
with 50% of the 7.33.
Yeah, because the numbers work out to that
Okay.
currently. Because, when we made that decision, and at the budget committee level this year, the $4 million a year, when that was decided on, at the cost of construction at that point in time, we gained about 1.25 PCI index per year, pavement condition index per year, that would have got us to the 85 in the period, that 20-year period. Today's construction cost, you're down to about 3/4 of a point, right? So the $4 million now is far less meaningful given today's cost of construction.
Yep.
Which is not petroleum-driven as it was in the past. We still have the riders and all the construction contacts for the change in asphalt for the petroleum riders. It's labor and availability of contractors to get the work done. That's the driving cost.
And to a taxpayer who may be watching or viewing the meeting, you could look at this and be like, oh my God, they're going up from 4 to 4.5 to 5 to 7 or whatever. It's a bigger number. The city's spending money or whatever. I just look at it completely the opposite way. This is the thing that most taxpayers feel the most emotional about is our infrastructure. So this is a way of setting aside that money that's required for that infrastructure and making sure that it's there. So I view that as a positive. Okay.
Maura's hand is up.
Sorry. Who's
Maura's hand is up.
Oh, hi, Maura.
Oh, hi. My only comment to the 50% rolling stock, is there any necessary adjustment in the language that would make sure that that 50% could go to rolling stock in other departments as well? Because you're talking about a fire truck, and I think that this was intended for public works.
Well, right now it says 50% of the amount raised for capital improvement program shall be allocated to the costs associated with non-rolling stock transportation infrastructure. So that's your streets and roads.
Oh, okay. I don't have it in front of me, so okay, thank you.
Then it's open from there.
Then
as to
everything
where it
else is
goes.
open.
Okay, perfect.
By the way, we're moving really slowly here, but I think once we get through section 7, unless people feel really strongly, I think the rest of this is going to go pretty quickly. Or at least it's in areas that I know nothing about. So I'm going to be moving quick, and you guys can slow me down. So, all right. So can we put 610.3 aside and say we've covered that for now? So we're doing the 4% up to 7.33% over a 10-year period of time, and we're leaving the 50% language in there. Any objections to moving forward from that? All right. 610.4. Again, just speak up if you've got comments on these. Otherwise, I just go through. Section 611. I had nothing there. Yeah, I have highlighted on things like that. Yeah.
Because we only have the...
One or more newspapers of general circulation in the city. So that's old language. That's not pre-internet, but pre-widespread use of the internet. Do we want to, whenever it says newspaper, do we want to say on the city website? Well, we can, and. Yeah, we shouldn't keep newspaper, newspaper or online publication or however you want to refer to. I mean, we really just have the Sanford Springvale News, right? Is there any other thing that acts as a newspaper locally?
Well, we have the Seacoast, but they don't report specifically on Sanford. We get an article of note in there from time to time with Sean Sullivan writing for us, but it's not the paper of wider circulation for us.
So as this language is in here now, do you submit these things to?
You advertise in the Portland Press some of the public hearings.
We've stopped now.
Oh, really?
The Sanford Springvale News meets the legal definition. We've asked our legal counsel on that, and they said use the Sanford Springvale News. So.
Do we have the?
That's probably saved you a boatload of money.
Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, a small block ad, emphasis on the small, was $300, $400, $500 for a small ad in the Portland Press Herald.
Do we have the ability to, like the school has, to have residents sign up to receive text alerts?
Emails, not text alerts.
We have discussed that though, because we were talking about some winter road changes. And I know we've had a conversation, and I specifically mentioned to Jordan this would be nice to fix, is to have text alerts like that for winter snow emergencies, and to get to build that text alert would be great, because the school systems, I think, works very well.
I mean,
So,
if you could
we
have a simple text alert that just said, public hearing on the municipal budget, blah blah blah, refer to the city website. It wouldn't have to be a big long thing.
Well, we can do that by an email blast, right?
Yeah, but I don't know.
We don't have the software to do the text,
Okay.
so.
All right. I think it would be helpful if we had that software. I don't know what it would take to get that software, but
I would say that would be a wise investment that should be discussed.
yeah, I mean,
I would agree with you
95% of us
on that.
have cell phones, and you get responses immediately. So
Yeah.
all right. So so the way that's, Larissa, the way that's handled is you're going to highlight newspaper and we'll take that from there? Okay. Supplement, add to that with whatever language we want to add to. 612.1. Point 2.
Well, the meetings are all,
Point 1.
they're all saved to YouTube and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
Is that something that needs to be put in here? That's,
Back, are you back on 611.1 still?
no, 12.1.
12.1. Following the initial.
And televised when feasible. I mean, they're all recorded, and they're on the, I think on the city webpage where people can go back and watch them.
Open to the public, televised when feasible, and available for playback, something like that.
Mr. Chair, I think the when feasible language that's in there, and I'm not disagreeing with what's being said. I think the when feasible was, at that time, there were probably some technical restrictions, and we didn't want to be held by the charter. And at this point, I was not a member of either committee. We didn't want to be held by the charter to being forced somehow or being in violation of the charter if for some technical reason we weren't able to broadcast the meetings. I think that's why the where feasible language is there. So I understand what everybody's saying, but we also don't want to set ourselves up to be in a position where the school committee is in violation of the charter if they don't televise a meeting.
Sure.
So,
But you could, Jack, to your point, you could easily add language there to be public and televised and available for playback on
Yeah, the city's
YouTube or
website.
whatever
Yeah.
when feasible. Leave the when feasible in there, but kind of modernize the language to
yep.
be
I
able to.
wouldn't be doing my volunteer role if I didn't put a plug in for WSSR-TV. It's a heck of an asset the community has and students' knowledge, so.
Yep. All right. Thank you. 612.2. Point 3. 613. So I have this highlighted just, again, it gets to, and this was before we had the conversation today regarding the makeup of the budget committee / authority of the budget committee. So it says that the city manager may transfer with city council approval. There's a lot of language to that, and maybe it just needs to stay that way. Is the budget committee, if the budget committee is comprised of school committee and city council members, does the budget committee need reference in things like this? Does the budget committee need to approve anything? I mean, ultimately.
So I can give you a history on that, Lance.
Okay.
So when we set that percentage back in 2002, 2003, the first charter, we looked back at the historical town meeting. And so when you went to historical town meeting for the budget, you would, one of the articles you had to approve was what had already been transferred from the prior year, because it happens, fire departments fall short, police is looking good, you do a transfer to kind of make everything work. And it happens in any budget. So we looked at historically what it had been, and it had always been below 2%, the amount that was approved after it had already happened. So we just have continued to set 2% since the charter was written, and it pretty much has never changed. So I think that's kind of more what it was about.
Okay. And mine was actually just had to do with like who, with the and again, with the composition of the budget committee is pretty much school committee members and city council members. Is probably a non-point of whether city council approves or if the budget committee is even involved.
So right now, the Budget Committee is not involved with that 2% transfer. So Ronnie, the council votes on that each year, so we have the ability to move funds interdepartmental up to 2% in total throughout the course of the year.
And this is just on the municipal side of the budget.
Just on the municipal side. The other example that this speaks to is last year, there was revenues higher than anticipated from fire department operations. That was the vaccination clinics. They took in a large sum of money which that was bankrolled, and then the city council pulled that off and pulled that from the fund balance. They let it lapse to fund balance in June. And after that, the books closed. They then pulled that off and used that in the undesignated, so $160,000 there to fund 2 firefighter paramedics for a 9-month period post-budget adoption, so.
I think I was probably coming at this when I highlighted, I was probably coming at it from a standpoint of being frustrated when I was on budget committee to be, you set a budget based on what you think the anticipated revenues were going to be. Then more revenues came in, and then budget committee wasn't necessarily involved anymore because we were done. And then money got spent, and I'd be like, but what if there were other priorities? But ultimately, it's a council decision, so I get that. And then ultimately, I guess if we're going, I highlighted it before we were doing the 5 and the 7. So ultimately, if all the constituents are involved, school doesn't really need to know what the municipal side of the budget is doing with any unanticipated revenue, I guess. All right, I think we can move on. I think I'm the only one that had any energy there. And it got changed by the makeup of the budget committee. 614, 615. 617. Sorry, go ahead, Sue. I can't hear you.
Well,
Nope, now I
okay.
can.
The analysis from general code previously supplied references section 614 and 619.3, referencing 20A main revised statutes and a 15613 section repealed in 2005.
So it's just a changing of the language on things that were repealed? Okay. So can we just highlight those and eliminate the reference to that language? Thank you, though, because I didn't have that part out. Where had I gone to? 617. I had highlighted before the beginning of the budget year. Do we need a date there? Or do you just want to, that language leaves it flexible enough? I mean, I don't have a big issue there, but, okay. $618. Should we skip this? Skip and come back? Just highlight that whole section, please. We've only got 47 minutes left in the meeting to get through 618. 619.1. Go ahead, Paul.
That's allowing for the city manager and the school superintendent to adjust things if federal money or state money is made available? Is that
That's how I read it.
Is
that how it is, Steve?
Some manna from heaven drops, you guys have the ability to utilize it without wasting it.
ARPA funds are a good example. COVID money came in, was a good example of that. Many times the council will authorize the application for grant funds and such under that comes in mid-year and such, and then they will allocate how that is to be expended and such under that. On the city side of the equation, pursuant to legal, even though it's in the charter and such under that, just to cover all bases, they do a resolution in there to accept, the council has the authority to accept any and all grants that come in mid-year and such under that, just to make sure that these points are all covered in there.
Okay.
So just a quick comment, kind of along the same lines of what I was just talking about before. If I'm going back to we have unanticipated revenue that comes in, my past experience with budget committee, what I was just talking about, maybe having some frustration if money was spent in a way that I wouldn't have done it, of course, knowing that I don't have control of that. But if you do have 3 members of the public or 3 or 5 members of the public that are serving on budget committee and unanticipated revenue comes in and city council is the only people that are making decisions and the budget committee isn't consulted, even though they make up the majority of the committee, I could see being frustrated as a member of the committee that isn't really involved in that process. So is there a way to change the language here to have budget committee?
Reconvene?
But that's not part of the budget, right?
Right?
Well,
It's not. It's not part of the budget. So for example,
but
we
it
have
would
a
affect
Fire
the
Act
future year's budget potentially.
Yeah, so we have a Fire Act grant out now for 4 fire paramedics for full funding for 3 years. And we anticipate hearing for that in September. That will be a huge piece for the city.
But in
and
the
that-
next budget cycle, you would account for that.
Right. And really, your quote-unquote fiscal cliff happens 3 years out in that particular situation, as to whether you have to eliminate 4 positions, or you're going to you have the ability to fund and carry those 4 positions forward to finally get the city to the full complement of 52 that it's been striving for decades.
Mr. Chair, you do have financial oversight with the city council and the school committee. Funds come into the school committee. The superintendent wants to spend those funds. He's going to run that by the school committee, and same thing with the city manager.
Yeah, I get that. I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody who's volunteering on that budget committee, where I'm spending my time meeting once a month or whatever for the entire year, and then decisions get made that are sort of outside what we've talked about before, and being frustrated by that. You know, not that that would be me, but I'm feeling for those people. And I guess I get your point. It's not really part of that year's budget, but it would affect I mean, if I was on budget committee, I would not want to be focused that much on this year's budget. I'd be focused on the next 5 years' budget. So it would have an impact on the work you're doing.
You're going to see that in a subsequent year if
In a
it
following
comes
year.
in. I mean,
Yeah,
could
but
be a
once
CD
money's spent, you can't just take it back.
We've got a CDBG grant out there for facade improvements. Not part of the budget, won't hit the books as part of the budget and whatnot, but that $250,000 will go out and do work on Main Street and such under that. So it's those elements. Some comes back into the budget in future years, and most of those elements don't.
So most of those monies are targeted for certain projects, though, right?
They are.
You can't say, well, I'm going to take that facade improvement and fill potholes.
Right, and that's the consternation of the public a lot of times. You pull in $250,000 CDBG, you go, why aren't you putting that into the roads?
Because it's supposed to be used for a certain
Because I
thing.
can't.
Yeah.
I have to do facade improvements.
I guess I'm not thinking so much of grants for specific things, because it's probably not to this section. I'm thinking about years where, revenue sharing was higher than projected, or, money fell into our lap for whatever reason that we didn't expect to get.
COVID money this year, or the past 2 years, and how that's allocated, I guess. Would that be part of, you anticipate as part of that?
Well, like COVID money that came to us with a lot of strings, it could only be spent in certain ways. It was very useful, and we expended it in that regard. ARPA funds came, and, there was a large conversation amongst the council as to how they were going to allocate those use of ARPA funds and such. Other than that, we don't have much money of any quantity that just drops out of the sky. It's always for something targeted, like a soil and water conservation for a specific parks improvement, or a CDBG grant to do work in the downtown, or something of that nature.
All right.
There are trust funds that come from time to time, but those always have for a specific purpose only.
I'm not getting a lot of energy that anybody else feels really strongly about this, so it's probably my own thing that I can move on from. That was 619.1, 619.2.
Yes. So currently, there is the city council can authorize borrowing not to exceed $250,000. That is far too small a sum of money in this realm. It needs to be increased, and increased significantly, to $1 million at a minimum.
Give me an example of when we've needed to do that.
Let's
Or when so that could have been the fire?
The last number of those was, there have been 2, it's been part of the budget process, it's gone through the budget process. There's been a 2-phased extension of Presidential Lane under the tax increment financing district that's out there. where they're building a series of new hangars. And so the council has supported, went through the process last year and the year before, a $250,000 bond that didn't have to go to voter referendum to be able to do that project. What other times have they used that $250,000? It's very rare, but that is very limiting. $250,000 in today's world is not much.
So it's the key is to be able to borrow, let's use the $1 million number, to be able to borrow the $1 million without going to referendum.
Some figure larger than 250,000.
Right, I'm just using $1 million as an
right.
example.
I think the million is an example, and I don't know where that limit is, that beyond that, the public should be voting on that. What is a significant capital project? What dollar figure is that you reasonably need the public to vote on? So, for example, this year, in November, there will be a vote on $1 million referendum to gain up to $5 million of EPA funds coming through Southern Maine Planning Commission to start addressing the International Wooling Complex, taking the boiler building out that stacked down, doing all the environmental abatement there, creating a cap in there for more parking, and then moving from there to the next phase of international wooling.
I mean, if it was 250 10 years ago and we applied 7% inflation to it for 10 years, that would be 500 today, roughly. So 500 seems like a more reason. I mean, unless we felt like 250 wasn't enough 10 years ago, if we're just dealing with inflation, then 500 would be more than the same as $250,000 10 years ago.
Well, for me, this number is $1 million all day long.
Well, no, I don't. It doesn't need to be about that. I mean, if it's what, but you haven't had to borrow that much money. If it was $1 million, if it was listed at $1 million in the charter right now, would you have done anything differently over the last 10 years?
Haven't had the ability to do that.
What would you have done differently if you can think of an example?
I would have borrowed the $500,000 for the presidential lane in a single year as opposed to 2 years, and not put our treasurer through copious amounts of work that it takes to do. It's the same amount of work to do a $250,000 bond at the Maine bond bank as $100 million. It's the same amount of work.
Okay, that's a great answer. That helps me. So you're envisioning it now as you would want to borrow the same amount of money. You'd have to do the same amount of work 3 or 4 times to get to your $1 million over 4 years or whatever.
Yep.
Anybody have a problem with the $1 million?
I have my budget hat on or my taxpayer hat on. Yeah, I mean, $1 million.
Yeah, as a
$1 million
taxpayer, it's
It is. I mean, I'm kind of reminded of the land I think the council voted to approve for the new fire department, when the voters voted down that bond a year prior, and I thought, I had a little indigestion over that act, so this kind of comes back to me and says, wait a minute. So,
yeah. That's my first question was about that too. Like, $1 million. It's not a small commitment. Finance probably over, what does it say, minimum time necessary. It leaves enough flexibility there.
Maybe it would be helpful, what defines, it says to meet a public emergency affecting the health, safety, and welfare of the city? So what, actually defines that? Maybe that would help us. What defines,
That's a good point.
yeah.
So is it $1 million to just do something that the city wants to do, or is it really a public emergency
For
of
a
some kind?
public
And how do we define that?
emergency. Like the land you just mentioned isn't, I wouldn't say.
That wouldn't
is a
be defined as public emergency.
Emergency, right.
So let's talk about the land. So the land was put out for $1 million. No, seriously, this is very germane. So that was put out at a level of time where the city was looking at a speculative purchase, right? So there were multiple pieces of land at that point in time, which was about 4 years ago. There were multiple pieces of land in that South Sanford district area. City didn't want to give up its competitive negotiation perspectives by putting that out there too publicly as to what they had in the works. And they asked for a leap of faith from the voters for $1 million, not all of which would have been used for the purchase, but others were going to move forward for there. So we need to purchase 2 pieces of land for fire stations ultimately, one in Springvale and one in, we'll call it South Sanford. The voters said no to that for good reason, right? It was too speculative. That's what I was hearing back. It was too speculative. We didn't have the details, couldn't give them the details at that point in time. So there's all of that. So fast forward to the current period of time, the ARPA funds, Biden administration and the Congress decides they're going to print money, and they're going to dole it out everywhere, right? So the city gets an award of $2.2 million, and when you look at what was allowed under that federal designation, that purchase of land in an impacted district, which that is, we have one of 2 census tracts in the entire state, so that qualified for the purchase of land towards public safety buildings without having to take that on the taxpayers' rolls. And the reason that's so critical is that is the only site that was left of the 3 original sites that we were looking at. So the longer you wait, right, and the lack of flexibility for our city council to move rapidly on such purchases ultimately is going to end up costing you more money because they bought that land, but there's much improvements that have to be done there than if we could have had one of the other 2 properties that we originally were proposing. So that's the cost of not being able to act rapidly with your elected officials.
But that wouldn't have qualified as an emergency, yeah.
I mean, good planning, fantastic, certainly a critical item. Certainly a critical item. Guess maybe I'm rethinking my million, throwing that out like it was water, and maybe refining that back, saying, let's look at your inflation or your inflation of the 250 and go to the $500,000.
Well, I don't have a problem with the million if we define emergency.
Okay.
Because if we really had an emergency, I think we'd want to be able to act quickly on a large amount of money.
But on the flip side, having that same situation with fire station property not being an emergency, go back out to the voters and let them make that decision.
That's kind of how I view it.
I agree with that as well.
But if it's an emergency, how quickly can you get a vote?
Well, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't need
if
one
it was
if
$1 million.
we put the $1 million
Right,
bucks
but
in.
I'm just saying, the way this is written, I mean, it would take time to set up a vote
A council vote?
So under your code currently,
to the voters.
if you had a state of public emergency, so it's a massive ice storm, flooding, hurricane, a tornado comes through, or such under that, I so declare that, as the manager, I so declare that emergency. The council can expend whatever they need to expend in whatever rapid fashion they have, and then you go back and appropriate the funds subsequent to that.
Yeah.
And I think, and I guess I come from a bit of a lower background, whenever you have ice storm, people about heat, where the warming center, where, not that big for it, that's one kind of thinking about water, remember? That would be like something.
So you're saying in what Kim was talking about in definition of emergency, council already has the ability to be able to borrow unlimited money.
Under, I can't remember the code number, I think it's 5. For your public emergency that deals with these storm events and such under that. That's a separate definition and a whole separate set of circumstances. So, for example, during COVID, in consultation with the mayor at that time, we actually exercised that under ordinance Chapter 5, I think it's 5, we exercised that and declared a state of emergency for the city. So that's what closed the offices originally and put some of the masking pieces in place that was different from what the CDC was saying at that point in time. So that's all been lifted off at this juncture. But when you look at that, it really is to the storm events, right? Massive flooding blows roads out or something like that. Council, they have to make the repairs. There hasn't been a specific appropriation for that, but there is not a choice at that point. You have to, you have to put that culvert back in and.
Berwick Road had a culvert washout one year, and. Yeah, Mother's Day or something.
Yep. Yes.
Easily, I'm comfortable with that, too.
To me, though, the wording of this 619.2 then is weird then. To meet a public emergency affecting the health, safety, or welfare of the city. It seems like that's saying that, yeah.
Do we have a secondary type emergency that we are trying to recognize here? Or is emergency a bad word?
Yeah, the term emergency is, well, and, health, safety, welfare, is it really, is it really, Steve, what you're talking about is the ability to be able to borrow
Timely.
in a timely fashion for something that might not be an emergency, but is an opportunity that the municipality has.
But the legal counsel will tell, our legal counsel for the city will tell you that the council has a $250,000 borrowing without going to a referendum vote. It goes in as.
For any purpose.
Right, but that goes in as part of your appropriation.
Well, then I think.
This is outside of the appropriation, right? They could borrow outside of that. So the council has not done any borrowing outside of the appropriation. So for the example, those two $250,000 bonds that they approved, right, that went into the municipal appropriation for those years.
So what is this dealing with then? Does this even need to be
Public
here?
emergency on presidential.
Welfare of the city. They can make that determination, up to $250,000. Beyond that, it goes out to the voters. That's the legal interpretation of this article.
Okay. So now I'm less comfortable with the article that way. I recognize if it was worded differently, I think I could be a little more comfortable with that. But for the sake of, I agree on the issues of the fire station property being a timely issue, and certainly impacting public safety because you're recognizing that. But if the voters say no, I'm also a fan of the voters having the ability to participate.
So read section 619, is amendments after adoption of the annual budget, right? This is after, so this is not part of your annual appropriation, right? It would get rolled into the next appropriation. Whereas anything the council's done up to $250,000 has been part of that year's fiscal appropriation. It's been put in there as part of the budget process.
It's basically to account for, after the budget process is done, between June for the following year, or fiscal year or whatever, to be able to borrow additional money if needed. The vote already happened in June, but the emergency happened in September.
Right.
You need to be able to borrow that money.
So you blow the road out on Mother's Day and it's a $500,000 repair that you don't have the funds for. You'd have to do an emergency appropriation. Then that's going to add to your debt service in subsequent years, but you need the authority to move timely on that. Because you can't go out to a referendum vote on that. Time's not there.
I agree with you 100% on, that one falls right smack into my gut feeling of what an emergency is. But the opportunity, suddenly Paul Demers, land baron in Sanford, wants the city to have an opportunity to own a piece of property, but I want to move in a timely manner as I'm doing that. I think the voters still should have a participation in that decision to buy a piece of property, whether it's a special, I don't know, that's not an emergency. that this seems to give you the authority to do without the voters.
Didn't find it.
Yeah, to me, it's just worded weirdly. I mean, if the council already has the ability to respond with unlimited funds to a public health emergency, then this wouldn't need to be in there unless it says something else than what it says.
So there's two different sections here. So this is the emergency appropriation after the budget is
Yep.
passed in 619. The other $250,000 that I've been speaking about, it's under 705.1 and 705.2, talks about bond issues and ballot referendum.
Yep.
So that's where that amount is in there. But,
the presidential one came about?
yes,
And that's part of the budget process.
part of the budget process.
Right.
Right. So anything bigger than the 250 has to go out to referendum approval. But again, back to the emergency piece of this. So I think you should be comfortable with the emergency piece, right? But is 250 enough? No. What emergency repair am I going to make for $250,000? Not much.
Yeah, I mean,
So we're mixing and matching here,
yeah, I think we're spending a lot of time on something that probably isn't
an issue.
a big issue, again, other than I find the wording of it seems like it should be cleaned up. It seems like again, the public emergency affecting health, safety, and welfare seems to fall under the thing that already exists elsewhere.
Well, I think I muddied the water by referencing the presidential lane, because that wasn't approved under 619.2, that's under 705.
Perfect, thank
So
you.
I think I muddied the water there. I know I muddied the water there. I did.
All right. So let's go, do we want to make a decision on whether we want to increase this number from 250 and to what? Steve said it's $1 million all day long.
A real emergency? Absolutely. I agree with him.
Okay, and do we need to change wording on this, or are we comfortable with how it's worded? I mean, it could just be me, that,
Could you come back, Steve, with some, maybe,
Well, I don't think you have to on this, because this is
Truly.
is truly an emergency, and it's after the adoption of the budget. So this is, supplemental resources that aren't available because of the declared emergency, right? And then 705 gets into the council's ability as part of the annually developed budget as to what their bonding authority is, and it's capped at 250,000 right now.
could we call it
if we're-
a declared
And
emergency?
that's part of the budget process.
but in a declared emergency, the council already has the ability to borrow unlimited money. Why does this section even need to be here?
Yeah.
Well, when you look at what falls into, before I can make that declaration, when you look what falls into that, it's a pretty bad disaster, so.
So this is like a grade C emergency that we're talking here?
I don't,
What,
I don't know. I think this is one of those elements that the charter was, because you have the ability to, with the charter, to define the authority of the legislative body, which is the city council, and the school board. You get into that realm, but when you dig deep into 30A and 36 or 7, which is the public emergency pieces, there's broader authority that's granted by state law that occupies that space during hurricanes and floods and other natural disasters.
I guess then I just throwing that word declared in there. Call this a public declared emergency?
But
As opposed-
but if it's a publicly declared emergency,
They already have the authority. But you're saying that,
But, so in the Mother's Day storm, you blew out that large strut out there, right?
Yep.
I'm not going to,
declared emergency.
I'm not going to declare that upon the whole city because you blew out one strut. I'm
right,
going to go close the road, and I'm going to scramble to find the resources to put the strut back in, right?
yeah, it's, okay.
I'm not putting a curfew in place and all those, I'm not,
Or a localized?
Joan, go ahead.
It does say that you have to have the vote of at least 6 members of the city council, so that's kind of a self-protection there, isn't it?
takes a supermajority.
Yeah, I guess personally, it'd be great if we could like define what the grade C emergency is. Like it's an opportunity that has come up, or it's something that the council has determined that has to be acted in a timely manner.
The opportunity is still back on 7. That's the,
But that's included in the current budget, right? Section 7 deals with the current budget.
Right.
is
Mr.
something-
Chair?
Sorry, we're getting bogged
Mr.
down. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Could we change the language around a little bit to say something like with a supermajority of the city council, the city manager may borrow up to $1 million. And I know we're still on emergency. You call it something like a localized emergency or something like that. Does that help?
It does. So Steve, you know what we're getting at, right? I think the term emergency is throwing us, and we want to define it to some extent of what the council's ability really is to borrow $1 million. And I understand the supermajority piece.
So I'm gleaming the charter right now for every time it uses the word emergency. It's in there a lot.
Go ahead, John.
I think the issue really is inflation still. This hasn't been a problem in the past. Things cost more today. I think it's as simple as that. I don't know that I'd change a lot of language. The council is a representative form of government. It takes 6 out of 7 to vote for it. That's a hard thing to get on certain sensitive items, so I think it's okay if you just raise the number. You guys pick the number, but, I mean, Matt and I had just for a couple of things. I don't want to overstep my bounds here.
Yep. Okay. So maybe the language doesn't need to be changed. I mean, as you said, it hasn't come up, but doesn't mean it won't. And if we're talking about potentially quadrupling the money, it becomes an issue. I think if we're going to increase the number, we should increase it to $1 million. The question for me was simply, do we need to change the language to apply any sort of like limitation to the type of things the $1 million can be borrowed for? Guardrails, yeah. But, you know, can we highlight that area and come back to it? You kind of understand what we're doing there, and if any language can be cleaned up there, that would be great, and we can talk about it again as we're kind of finalizing as we go. Got 18 minutes left. 619.3. Point 4.
619.3, that's that same reference.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I've got that
so
called
you
out here.
that was the one you were referencing before. We can clean up the same thing. Thank you. 619.4, 620. Again, this is the public records and shall be available to the public at suitable places in the city. You know, so we could add the references to the city website. Article 7.
Woohoo.
701, 702. Again, one or more newspapers of general circulation in a city. You know, to me, that would be, the text. the text, the city website.
it would text message the entire budget to everybody's phone.
Download here.
Well, I've got that.
Data
LED
rates may apply.
too.
The LED sign out front. I don't know if we need to put that in here.
So under 702, notice form and vote, if you're going to keep school budget voted only, there's strikeouts here, right? This would need to be cleaned up.
So yeah, we have to make that, we can, again, highlight this as something to come back to depending on what we decide on the vote. We're going to have this whole thing highlighted and have to run through the whole thing again. It's going to be awesome.
703 is the same thing.
703, same thing.
Yep.
Language cleanup depending on what we decide. That also includes the reference to the 25% of total voters. So, I mean, this is obviously, that 703 section is something that we have to come back to depending on what we decide. on the vote. And I think for all of us to make a decision there, I think David would need to be here. I think we all need to be here in order to make that decision as well, I think.
Also under, let's see, this is under section 703. Page am I on? I'm on. Oh, geez, it says C26, but it's the large paragraph that starts, the amount stated in the municipal budget, comma, as adopted, including any revisions from subsequent budget validation referendum. So that whole piece has been stricken by the law that we're referencing. So I put in my notes, invalidated by state law 20A, section 1486, 4, and 1487. So the state has occupied the space, and they say if you have a no vote on your budget, what has to be done. So that's a change since this charter was put in place. The state's occupied that space. So I'll come back and make the appropriate revisions for you.
Okay.
Steve, did you say that 25% doesn't apply to the school budget?
Correct.
Is there a minimum percentage, the 25% minimum voters? Jack?
It doesn't apply.
Doesn't apply to the school
The
budget.
25% was that derivation, that was the evolution in your charter, that if you didn't have at least 25% voter turnout, then the referendum vote on the municipal budget went away. They didn't meet that, it went away, right? But as far as the school budget is concerned, that's the state process. If 5 people show up,
And 5 people
Five
vote
people
no,
vote.
it's defeated?
No.
There is no percentage limit.
right,
So
If
yes.
the majority of voters vote no against the school budget,
So if 5 people
it
vote and
doesn't
3
care
people
if
vote no.
it's 2% of the voters or 100% of the voters. No means no, and it must be voted on again. We did that in, was it 2016, Matt?
That's state law? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
victor, otherwise.
And every how many years that comes up? The vote, every 3 years?
Every 3 years, and this year is...
Voters would have to actively say, we don't want to vote on that anymore for that to happen.
It's this year,
Correct.
right. So for the small handful of people that go out and vote, right, for school budgets, let's say that's the only thing there, and the question's on the ballot, why would they vote no on that? Why would they vote to not come out and vote on it? Because they took the effort and they came out to vote on it. They're not going to vote it down. Yeah, my tax bill, yeah.
The few people that do vote are not going to vote down the ability to be able to vote on the school budget, is what you're saying. Okay.
Right.
So it'll never happen. Yeah.
And
That you
then,
guys would like to be in.
No, he came to one of our budget meetings for the public thing, and he said,
I apologize.
no. But that was, I'll always remember that, because he says he came to vote because it's the only time he's asked. I'll always remember that he came back to say for that, and that was profound and stuck with me in terms of how this is set up.
That's funny that you remember that, and that he's my father-in-law.
You were the chair of the budget committee. I mean, that was the...
Hey, I probably tried to block it out. Yeah. 704. Same thing. I have that whole area highlighted with the 25%. His name is Carol McMillan, resident of Sanford. Section 705. I think he identified himself at the meeting as my father-in-law. 705.1.
Yep, so that's the piece that I was
That's the
talking about.
250 in the current. No language needs to change there, I don't think. Or are you saying that amount needs to be increased?
That amount needs to be increased, yep.
Now that, I don't have a problem with, because that's still part of the budget,
Right.
particularly if, I mean, I guess that's again approved by the city council or whatever, and then depending on what we decide on voting the budget, whether we vote the municipal budget or not, then the taxpayers either do or do not have kind of input there. So I wouldn't have a problem with that, increasing that.
So that would be increasing to $1 million?
Yeah. I'm in favor of $1 million there.
I think the million is reasonable there. Beyond that, it needs to go out to referendum.
Problems with that? Anyone? Okay. 705.2. Same thing.
Yep.
705.3. 705.4. 0.5. Yeah, well, actually, 7 was that was the last of the hard ones for me, anyway. All right. So, summarizing 6 and 7, and Matt and John, well, maybe I was going to say you wouldn't necessarily have to come to the next meeting if we're dealing with 8, 9, 10, 11, because they don't directly apply, but we could come back to 6 and 7, so you're obviously invited to attend if you want to. Do you want to, we could keep going for 8 minutes on section 8, or we can have this be a good stopping point? Okay, so I think sections 8 on, we can cover pretty quickly the next meeting. That's what the next meeting was designed to do, and I bet we still have time to come back and look at 6 and 7 again for highlighted areas. And you're gonna send us the highlighted areas again with the meeting minutes or whatever, the meeting packet next time? Okay, thank you.
When is next time?
The 16th,
16th?
2 weeks from today,
Okay.
10:15. Any other comments, either from those on the internet or here in the room? All right, I guess we'll close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.